Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, releases The Wizard of Oz on August 25th, 1939. It's widely assumed that this was their response to the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. The Wizard of Oz is based off of a series of books by L. Frank Baum, the first of which, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, being released in 1900. The final book in the series, Glinda of Oz, released in 1920. In total, there would be 14 of these original Oz books. The production of The Wizard of Oz has a reputation, to say the least, when it comes to people being injured and moved around and changed throughout it, but it's important to note that not all of these stories are true. In fact, a lot of them are flat out lies, or at the very least, exaggerations of what actually happened. However, despite all of the exaggerations and rumors, there are some events that we do know took place that would overall change the course of how The Wizard of Oz would be made. One of these events is the injury of Buddy Ebsen, who was originally casted as the Tin Man. He had an allergic reaction to the aluminum dust used for his costume that wound up coating his lungs and making it hard for him to breathe. Ultimately, he did recover, but his recovery took so long that he was taken off of the project and replaced with Jack Haley, who would become the Tin Man as we see in the final film. Another injury that we know took place was Margaret Hamilton being severely burned during one of the scenes with pyrotechnics. Ultimately, she did recover and return to set, but she refused to be in any further scenes with these sorts of stunts. There is a story out there that the production team called asking when she would return to set, and her doctor simply said that she would return to set when he said that she could. Even Terry, the dog who plays Toto, wasn't safe from all of the mishaps on set. He was actually stepped on by a crew member and needed to take a few weeks off to recover. It's also reported that anxiety that he had worked through came back during and after the production of the movie. If you aren't used to watching older movies, one thing that might catch you off guard right away is that there's a lot more to the opening credits than you would see nowadays. So in that initial credit scene, we get introduced to, obviously, our main cast and some of the key players to the movie, such as the directors, who the music was by, who the screenplay was by, and a cinematographer. Wizard of Oz's directing credit ultimately went to Victor Fleming, but when he stepped away to work on Gone with the Wind, King Vidor took over for the Kansas scenes as well as some of the Munchkin scenes, although remained uncredited in the role. George Cukor was also an uncredited director for a total of 3 days, during which he requested that the character Dorothy not wear the wig and have less makeup. Richard Thorpe was also an uncredited director who was fired after 12 days. Along with many other screenplays, The Wizard of Oz had many people who helped to write the script, although the screenplay was ultimately credited to Noel Langley, Florence Ryerson, and Edgar Allan Wolfe. As for the music, the musical adaptation was credited to Herbert Stothart and the lyrics to E.Y. Harbert, and music ultimately to Harold Arlen. Harold Rossen was the cinematographer for The Wizard of Oz. One of the big selling points for this movie was the fact that it was photographed in Technicolor. Onto the cast. So Judy Garland plays Dorothy Gale. Judy Garland does an absolutely fantastic job in this movie. I don't think there is anyone else who could play Dorothy in any capacity as well as she did. Prior to Judy Garland being casted as Dorothy, Shirley Temple was also considered for the role. Personally, I think that no one else could have played Dorothy the way Judy Garland did. I'll talk about this later, but I think the relatability to the characters is one of the big reasons that this movie is still talked about. Ray Bolger plays both Hunk and Scarecrow, and I think he is one of the best additions to this cast. He manages to play the Scarecrow with such a energy and physical performance that I think would be hard to reproduce by anyone else. The way that he moves as the Scarecrow, even when he's just walking, is priceless and adds so much dimension to the character. Burt Lahr also has an amazing performance in this movie. He plays the Cowardly Lion as well as Zeke back in Kansas. He manages to play this character in such a way that you're not scared of him, which having a lion in a kid's movie could be scary. Doesn't come off that way. Yes, it's probably mostly because he's not a lion. That helps. or the fact that he is clearly scared of everything. Truly, I don't think that there's a bad member of this cast, so I'm gonna try to go through the rest of them pretty quickly. Margaret Hamilton is absolutely fabulous as the Wicked Witch of the West, as well as Miss Gulch. She's terrifying. She even had to go on to a episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to get kids to stop being scared of her. I think it's easy to look at the production and the quality of the movie now and not be nearly as scared of it, but I remember being terrified of the Wicked Witch. I think I would have been a lot more scared of the Wicked Witch had I not had my introduction to The Wizard of Oz be playing the Wicked Witch in a somewhat production of The Wizard of Oz for a holiday show. Truly, no one has ever played a better Wicked Witch in my eyes. Margaret Hamilton is the best. Jack Haley as the Tin Man is also an amazing cast member. I think that this is one that naturally is going to have some comparison of what, or maybe not comparison, but some ideas of what if, because of the fact that there was someone originally casted and beginning to kind of drift into the direction of actually filming the movie as the Tin Man before he took over. But I think he did an amazing job of stepping in and finishing the role and doing a just absolutely splendid job with the character of the Tin Man. I think that the Tin Man is the hardest character to show emotion for, but he manages to do it in such a brilliant way that it doesn't feel forced, and it doesn't feel like you're gonna overshadow what happens later in the movie. Frank Morgan as several different characters, but most notably Professor Marvel or the Wizard of Oz himself. He does a great job of playing many different characters throughout the movie, and he does an awesome job of kind of tying the story together. I think had these characters been played by someone who couldn't do it all, it could have come off as cheesy. Billy Burke as Glinda also does an awesome job. I also think that she has one of the most iconic lines in the movie. I mean, all of these characters have iconic lines. I think the entire movie is made up of iconic lines, but I think Glinda initially asking Dorothy if she is a good witch or a bad witch is one of the ones that I personally remember the most from this movie. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but also Terry, who plays Toto. It's hard to work with an animal on set, and he did a great job considering everything that could have been going on. Now let's talk about some specific scenes. Obviously, I can't give you a rundown of the entire movie, but there are some scenes that just stick out, whether that be because of how they were filmed or the way that they turned out or overall impact on the story. They're just important to talk about. I think the first one is Over the Rainbow. When we open the movie, it's in black and white, which is funny considering you've seen this opening credit scene that says, you know, photographed in Technicolor, and then you open to black and white. But I think having Judy Garland come out and one of the first scenes be her singing this song about wondering what's over the rainbow is the most brilliant way to start off this movie. I think this movie, had it had a different start or a different, you know, beginning arc, a different introduction to Dorothy, I think we could lose what the ultimate goal is. But by having her come out and sing about this hopeful place that she doesn't know what it looks like, but she longs to be there, is a beautiful way to introduce us to such a complex character. The movie starts with a dedication message that reads, "For nearly 40 years, this story has given faithful service to the young in heart, and time has been powerless to put its kindly philosophy out of fashion. To those of you who have been faithful to it in return, and to the young in heart, we dedicate this picture." The next scene I think that is really important to talk about is the tornado scene. No one on the farm knows where Dorothy is, and they're all freaking out. They get into the cellar, but Dorothy is locked out of the cellar, and Dorothy is swept up in the tornado in her house with Toto. But the thing that makes this scene more than just a tornado scene is you can see the tornado from outside her window, and the set itself kind of shakes, and it seems to all be very disjointed in my eyes, and you see through the window the tornado going by and different things flying by, like Miss Gulch on her bike, and having Miss Gulch turn into the Wicked Witch. on a broomstick, I think is a really cool transition, and it kind of shows that we're entering a different part of the movie. Overall, I think this scene is a brilliant transition from the beginning of the movie, introducing our characters, to we're in the story now. When they land, she opens the door, and as the door opens, the movie turns into color. I remember when I first saw that door open to color, and being the little film geek I was as a child without even knowing it, I was like, whoa, that's awesome, and I didn't understand at all how someone could be talented enough to figure out how to film that. And so getting to see it was so cool, and she truly goes from dreaming about being over the rainbow to being over the rainbow. In fact, I think she has a line that says something to the effect of like, this must be over the rainbow, or something like that, before she has the classic, you know, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. Another scene that I wanted to talk about was actually the poppy scene. I think that this one is just visually so cool. Just this field of poppies that they all wind up falling asleep in. Well, not all of them, but a good amount of the characters find themselves falling asleep and becoming drowsy, and then snow falling and waking them up because Glinda is helping them. Visually, I think this is a really, really cool place. I will say that it's not one of my favorites story-wise. I feel like it was kind of a present a problem but not have time to really have your characters figure out a way out of their problem, so just have someone else do it for them, which isn't the best storytelling technique, but I don't care because visually it's great. I think that getting the makeovers in the Emerald City is also one of my favorite scenes because it, to me, adds this idea of them changing themselves to make themselves a supposedly better version. I also can't help but chuckle and smile every time I see the lion with the little bow. I think that is just so funny. And again, I think that they are just constantly focused on this idea of like, how can I be better? For those of you who haven't seen the movie, sorry, I'm about to spoil it. Turns out, all along, they had what they needed. Dorothy had her way back to Kansas, or back to home. The Tin Man had a heart, the Scarecrow had brains, and the Cowardly Lion had courage. One thing I love about this reveal is that it's not just a, that makes no sense, that's just a conclusion to the story. We see that through the entire movie. We see the Scarecrow, who supposedly have no brains, come up with many of the plans in the movie. We see the Tin Man, who supposedly doesn't have a heart, show a vast array of emotions throughout the movie.
It's the Wicked Witch! What do we do? Help! Help!
And we see the Cowardly Lion do extremely courageous things throughout the movie. So I think it's done in a way that makes it make sense, but you weren't expecting it if you didn't know the story. I don't think anyone the first time through hearing the story expected for them to have those things. But when you look back at the movie and you watch it a second time, you see those themes picking up again. You see the fact that they have, you know, the emotions or the coming up with a plan. I love when movies are rewatchable, and I think that this is a prime example of a rewatchable movie because every time you watch it, you're gonna pick up something new. Unless you're on your like 50th time, and then in which case you might have seen it all, but I would say that you probably still are gonna pick up something new. Ultimately, when we find out everything that we do by the end of the movie, you're sitting there kind of wondering what it means. Doesn't mean anything, and I think you're naturally drawn to the conclusion of this movie is telling you that you are capable, and I think that that's a really cool thing, especially for a children's movie. I think it's beautiful to have a movie geared for children, looking at them and saying you are capable of far more than you think you are, and that ultimately is what the movie's saying. So whether you're 5 or 73, you can get that from this movie. You can relate to it, you can see it, and I don't think that the magic of watching, I think that this is one of the few movies that you can watch so many times and still feel the same way that you feel about it. And I think that's a fairly universal experience. I don't I have yet to meet someone who's seen the movie and not enjoyed it. I think the idea that you are able to sit and watch this movie and it almost feels like your first time watching it every single time you see it, or every time you see it parodied, it brings you back to that. I think that's a really cool thing. So if you haven't seen the movie, please do yourself a favor and watch it. I was lucky enough to get a movie that I was kind of already obsessed with. Had a lot of like video essays saved to watch, and I can now watch them and call it research. Ultimately, I think with this movie, its biggest strength is its legacy. Truly, I don't think that there is a movie that I could think of that has as big of a legacy as The Wizard of Oz does. Whether you've seen the movie or not, you have heard about it, you have seen it referenced, you have probably seen it parodied, you've seen merchandise, you know it even if you don't know it. You've probably even unknowingly referenced it yourself. There are seemingly hundreds of iconic quotes that come from this movie that are used all over pop culture. There are several TV shows and movies that come after The Wizard of Oz in 1939 that are in the same world of Oz. There are many, many, many different parodies of them in different TV shows and movies, even if they're just bits and pieces here and there. Prior to The Wizard of Oz in 1939, there were actually some different adaptations of the book. The one, of course, we know and is by far the most famous is the 1939 version. But after that came tons and tons of more movies that take place in the world of Oz, up to as recent as 2013 that I found of like legitimate movies in the world of Oz. There are several TV shows and movies that reference it, not in whole but in part, or parody pieces of it during one of their episodes. There's Broadway musicals like Wicked that are based off of this story that give sort of origin stories to characters who weren't given big origins in the movie. There's toys and merchandise everywhere, from stuffed Toto animals to Halloween costumes, all the way to slot machines, which, fun fact, Wizard of Oz slot machines are one of the most popular slot machines in Vegas. What do you think of when you think of The Wizard of Oz? Think of ruby red slippers, golden brick road on your way to the Emerald City? Do you think of one of the many, many songs and lines that have become absolutely iconic? Or do you think of something more than just a fun way to spend 2 hours? Think of what Over the Rainbow is for you. I think we all have those ideas of, if only we could get to Over the Rainbow. I have always adored this movie. I got introduced to it at a somewhat young age through parodies and stuff, but then finally watched it for the first time because I was going to be playing the Wicked Witch in a holiday show. Ultimately, if you get nothing else from my video, watch the movie. That's what you should get.